The paper was shaking in my hands, not because of a draft from the window, not because I'd had too much coffee that morning. My hands were shaking because the signature on the document in front of me, the one with my husband's name printed neatly beneath it, did not belong to my husband's name printed neatly beneath it, did not belong to my husband. I set it down on the kitchen table and pressed both palms flat against the wood to steady myself. Outside, a cardinal was singing in the old oak tree Frank had planted the year we moved in, 31 years ago. He always said that tree would outlive us both. I used to laugh when he said things like that. I wasn't laughing now. 3 nights before I found that document, Frank came to me in the dream. I know how that sounds. I'm 63 years old, a retired librarian from Dayton, Ohio, and I am not the kind of woman who puts stock in signs and omens. I believe in card catalogs, hot tea, and the restorative power of a good night's sleep, but I also know what I saw and what I heard and the way my chest felt when I woke up at 2:17 in the morning with his voice still ringing in my ears. In the dream, Frank was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I later found that document. He looked exactly as he had at 61, before the cancer had taken the weight from his face. His reading glasses were pushed up on his forehead, the way he always wore them when he wasn't actually reading. He was wearing the blue flannel shirt I had donated to Goodwill 8 months after he passed, and for a moment, when I saw it, my throat closed completely. He looked at me and said, "Dorothy, don't let Carol touch the house." That was all. Don't let Carol touch the house. I woke up gasping, the way you do when you've been holding your breath without realizing it. The bedroom was dark. The clock read 27:17. I lay there for a long time listening to the silence of a house where only one person sleeps, and I told myself it was grief. 2 years, and grief still finds new doors to knock on. I told myself my mind had been working through something it didn't know how to say out loud yet. I did not tell myself to ignore it. Frank and I had been married for 31 years when the pancreatic cancer diagnosis came. We had 4 months between the word terminal and the day I held his hand in the hospice bed and felt the moment his fingers stopped holding mine back. Those 4 months were the longest and the shortest of my life. We talked about everything during those months. His wishes for the house, the finances, what I should do with his workshop in the garage, whether I should stay in Dayton or move closer to our son Thomas in Columbus. We talked about Carol. My sister Carol is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, people always said we looked alike, though I never saw it. Carol got our mother's cheekbones and our father's stubbornness in equal and inconvenient measure. We had been close as children, less close as adults, and then something had shifted in the years after Frank got sick. She came around more. She called more. She offered to help with things she had never offered to help with before, and at the time, I was so exhausted and so grateful that I did not stop to examine why. Gary, her husband, was a real estate attorney. He had been for almost 30 years. I had always found him a little slick, the kind of man who laughs at his own jokes half a second before the punchline lands, as if he's already heard them himself. Frank tolerated him. That was the most generous thing I can say. Frank tolerated Gary the way you tolerate a loose floorboard. You know it's there. You step around it. You don't bring it up at dinner. When Frank passed, Carol was at the house within 2 hours. She brought a casserole and a grief face that I had no energy to analyze. She handled phone calls I didn't want to make. She sorted the sympathy cards and stacked them in neat piles on the counter. She was, in every visible way, exactly what a sister should be, and in the months that followed, she continued to be present in ways that had never been her habit. Sunday dinners, unannounced visits, suggestions about what I should do with the house, with the savings, with Frank's small life insurance payout. I was lonely. That's the truth of it. Grief makes you need people more than you want to admit, and Carol was there, and I let myself lean on that without looking too hard at the foundation. But something had been bothering me for weeks before the dream. Something small and nagging, the kind of thing you keep pushing to the back of a drawer because you're not ready to look at it yet. About 6 weeks after Frank passed, his attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Whitfield, who had handled our affairs for 20 years, had called to walk me through the estate documents. Everything had gone to me as expected. The house, free and clear, the savings account. a small investment portfolio Frank had been quietly adding to for years, worth a little over $200,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was security. It was the thing Frank had spent 30 years building, so I would never have to worry. Mr. Whitfield had mentioned, almost in passing, that he had a copy of the final will on file, and that if I ever needed documentation for any purpose, I should come to him directly. He had said it in a way that was professional and unremarkable, but I remember thinking at the time that it was an odd thing to emphasize. If I ever need documentation, come to him directly. I had filed it away and moved on. 2 nights after the dream about Frank, I came home from my Tuesday book club to find Carol sitting on my front porch. This was unusual. Carol did not stop by on Tuesday evenings. She knew I had book club on Tuesdays. She had been told about book club on Tuesdays many times, and she had a habit of calling Tuesdays your little reading group in a tone that suggested she found it both charming and slightly ridiculous. She was holding a folder. "I didn't want to bother you," she said, standing up when she saw my car pull in, "but Gary drew something up, and I thought it was better to just bring it in person." I should have asked what was in the folder before I let her inside. I should have asked a lot of things. But I was tired from the drive and still half thinking about the book we'd discussed, and my sister was standing on my porch with the folder, and some habits of trust are built over 6 decades and don't dissolve easily. Inside, Carol made tea while I sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder. It was, she explained from the counter, a deed transfer document. "Straightforward," she said. "Just a formality," she said. Gary had set it up so that the house could be held in a family trust, which would protect it from probate complications and simplify things for Thomas eventually. All it needed was my signature and one witness. She had brought a notary stamp. She had pre-filled the transfer name. The document listed Carol Marie Hendricks, her full name, my sister's full name, as the primary trustee, with administrative authority over the property. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. "Carol," I said slowly, "this doesn't transfer the house to a family trust. This transfers administrative control of the house to you." She turned from the counter with 2 mugs in her hands and a smile that arrived just a half second too late. "It's the same thing, Dot. Gary explained it to me. It's just the legal language they have to use. Gary is the one who drew this up. He does it all the time for clients. It's completely standard." I looked down at the document. And then, because the dream was still sitting in the back of my mind like a stone at the bottom of a clear stream, I said, "I'll need to have Mr. Whitfield look at this before I sign anything." The smile stayed on Carol's face, but something behind her eyes went somewhere else entirely. "Mr. Whitfield is almost 80, Dot. Gary has been doing this for 30 years. I think he knows more about current probate law than some retired. I'll call him tomorrow," I said. I closed the folder. I handed it back to her. "Thank you for thinking of me. I'll let you know what he says." Carol left 20 minutes later. She hugged me at the door. The hug lasted a moment longer than it needed to. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her car back out of the driveway, and for the first time since Frank died, I did not feel alone in the house. I felt like someone was watching over me. I felt like someone had already been watching over me for a while. The next morning, I called Mr. Whitfield before 8 o'clock. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which surprised me. I told him Carol had brought a document for me to sign. I described it as best I could. There was a pause on his end that told me everything before he said a single word. "Dorothy," he said, "do not sign that document, and I think we need to meet." I was in his office by 10. What Mr. Whitfield laid out for me over the next hour rearranged everything I thought I understood about the past 2 years. He had been Frank's attorney since the early 90s. He had the original will, witnessed and notarized, dated 3 weeks before Frank entered hospice. In that will, the house and all assets transferred to me outright, with a secondary provision for Thomas. Frank had been extraordinarily clear. 6 months after Frank's death, someone had submitted an amendment to the county property records office, a handwritten codicil, an addition to a will that indicated Frank's wishes had changed and that the family property was to be held in trust administered by Carol and Gary Hendricks. Mr. Child Whitfield had only discovered it by chance, when he'd done a routine check on the property filing for my annual records. The codicil bore Frank's signature. Frank had been in hospice for 11 days when the document was dated. He had been on palliative sedation. He had not been able to hold a pen. I sat in Mr. Whitfield's office and looked at the copy of that codicil for a long time. I looked at Frank's signature, a signature I had watched for 31 years, on birthday cards and anniversary notes and grocery lists and legal documents, and I felt something in my chest that was not grief and was not anger. It was colder than both of those things. It was the specific coldness of understanding. Gary was a real estate attorney. He had access to notary stamps and county filing offices and the kind of procedural knowledge that makes forgery not just possible, but difficult to detect. And Carol had been in my house constantly in those first months. She had handled paperwork. She had helped me organize Frank's study. She had gone through his filing cabinet looking for the life insurance policy, she'd said, to help me locate the documents I needed. She had been in his filing cabinet. I thought about the house. Our house, the one with the oak tree out front, the one with the kitchen table where I'd spread butter on toast every morning for 3 decades, and where Frank had done the crossword every Sunday, and where Thomas had grown from a baby to a boy to a man. $240,000 was the current appraisal. Carol and Gary's home was underwater by $60,000 in mortgage. I had not known that until Mr. Whitfield told me, quietly, that Gary had mentioned it at a bar association meeting the prior year. I thought about all of it, and I thought about Frank at the kitchen table in the blue flannel shirt, and I thought he knew. Somehow, in whatever way the people we love find to reach us when they can't reach us any other way, he knew. And he found me in a dream at 2:17 in the morning and told me exactly what I needed to hear. I did not call Carol that day. I did not call her that week. I spent those days doing what I should have done 2 years earlier, which was paying attention. Thomas drove up from Columbus on the Thursday after my meeting with Mr. Whitfield. My son is 34, works in hospital administration, and has his father's way of listening, completely still, no interruptions, letting you finish every sentence before he forms a thought. I had always loved that about both of them. I told him everything, the dream, the folder, the codicil, the filing. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, how long has this been going on?" I didn't know. That was the honest answer. I didn't know if this had been a plan from the beginning or something that had formed slowly in Carol and Gary's minds as they watched me navigate widowhood alone. I didn't know if they had told themselves it was for my benefit or if they had stopped pretending that a long time ago. What I did know was that I still had my original deed. I had Frank's original will filed with Mr. Whitfield. I had the codicil, which bore a date when Frank could not have signed his name. And I had Carol's fingerprints, figuratively speaking, all over 2 years of cultivated access. Thomas contacted a probate litigation attorney, a woman named Ms. Devereaux, who had been practicing for 25 years and who, when we explained the situation, said simply, "This is not the first time I've seen this. It won't be the last. But it is, in the cases I've handled, among the clearest." The investigation took 11 weeks. During that time, I continued to see Carol normally. Sunday dinners, phone calls. I smiled and I asked after Gary and I accepted her casseroles, and every time I did, I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was sadness. Not just for Frank, not just for the years of trust being methodically undone, sadness for the version of Carol I had believed in, sadness for the sister I thought I had, and grief, a second grief, quieter than the first but no less real, for the relationship I now understood had not existed in the way I had imagined. There is a particular loneliness in discovering that someone you loved has been performing love back at you, that the warmth and the presence and the casseroles were all in service of something else entirely. I don't think that loneliness has a proper name. It should. The handwriting analysis came back first. The signature on the codicil was consistent with Frank's general hand, but showed signs of copying, inconsistent pressure, slightly altered letter spacing, a hesitation in the capital F that Frank, who had signed his name 30,000 times over 61 years, would never have made. The notary stamp on the codicil had been used by a notary in Gary's firm who, when contacted, had no record of witnessing a document for Frank Alderman and no memory of visiting a hospice facility on the date in question. The county records office confirmed that the codicil had been filed not by Mr. Whitfield, not by me, but by a third party, a courier service that, after some back and forth, produced a receipt signed by an administrative assistant at Gary's firm. Ms. Devereaux filed for invalidation of the fraudulent codicil and simultaneously filed a civil complaint against Carol and Gary Hendricks for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception. I was at home when Carol called me the afternoon the complaint was served. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times that day and twice the following morning, and I did not listen to the messages for a long time after that because I already knew, in the way you know things when you have finally decided to see clearly exactly what she would say, that it was Gary's idea, that she hadn't known what he was filing, that she had only wanted to help me, that I was misunderstanding everything. What I knew was this. My sister had stood in my kitchen and handed me a document to sign that would have given her control of the house Frank worked his whole life to leave me. She had brought a notary stamp to my kitchen table. She had told me it was a formality. She had made me tea first. The criminal charges came 4 months later. Gary was charged with forgery, filing a fraudulent legal instrument, and conspiracy to commit property theft. Carol was charged with conspiracy. Gary's license to practice law was suspended pending the criminal proceedings. When I learned that, I sat in Mr. Whitfield's office and felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Thomas was with me the day the invalidation of the codicil was finalized and the property records were corrected. He drove me to Mr. Whitfield's office and waited in the small reception area while I signed the paperwork. On the way home, we stopped at the diner on 5th where Frank and I used to go on Saturday mornings, and I ordered coffee and the blueberry pancakes and looked out the window at the parking lot and thought about how unremarkable it all looked, how ordinary a morning it was for the world, while I sat there with my whole life quietly intact. Thomas asked me, over coffee, if I regretted not asking Mr. Whitfield to check the filing sooner. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I regret trusting in a way that let this happen, I said, but I don't regret trusting Carol in the first place. She was my sister. That's what you do with your sister. He nodded. He has his father's way of nodding too. Slow and complete, like the whole thought is being absorbed and not just the surface of it. Do you think Dad really came to you? He asked. He wasn't dismissive when he asked it. He said it the way he says things when he genuinely wants to know. I thought about the blue flannel shirt. I thought about the reading glasses on his forehead and the kitchen table and the cardinal and the oak tree. I thought about waking up at 2:17 with a voice in my ears that I would know anywhere, in any room, in any state between sleeping and waking. I think, I said, that Frank spent 61 years paying attention to people, to what they wanted and what they were afraid of and what they were capable of. I think he probably saw things in Carol and Gary a long time before I did. And I think if there is any way at all for the people we love to reach us when they need to, Frank was exactly the person who would have found it. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think so too. Gary pled guilty to the forgery charge 14 months after the complaint was filed in exchange for a reduced sentence. He received 18 months of supervised probation, a permanent bar from practicing real estate law in the state of Ohio, and an order to pay restitution for legal fees. Carol accepted a plea in the conspiracy charge. Her sentence was 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. I did not attend either proceeding. I had said everything I needed to say in the statement submitted to Ms. Devereaux, and I did not want to sit in a courtroom and watch my sister receive a sentence. Not because I felt sorry for her in a way that complicated the justice of it, but because I had spent 2 years watching Carol very carefully, and I was done watching her. I was done arranging my face in my kitchen and my Sundays around her presence in my life. The house still has the oak tree out front. I had the kitchen repainted last spring, a warm cream color that Frank always wanted, but that we never got around to. I go to book club on Tuesdays. I have coffee with Thomas on the first Saturday of every month. sometimes in Dayton, sometimes in Columbus. I am in the process of organizing Frank's workshop in the garage, which I should have done 2 years ago and couldn't bring myself to start until now. I sleep better than I did. I have not had another dream with Frank in it, not like that one. Sometimes I catch something, the edge of a voice, the particular way the light falls on the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, the sound of a crossword puzzle page turning. I don't know what those things are. I don't know what the dream was, really, or how to explain it to anyone in a way that sounds like anything other than a grieving woman who needed to believe her husband was still watching out for her. What I know is what happened. The document on the table. The signature. That wasn't his. The codicil filed when he was sedated and dying and could not hold a pen. I know that a dream woke me at 2 to 1:17 with 4 words that were exactly the 4 words I needed to hear at exactly the moment I needed to hear them. I know that I listened, and I know that the house of the oak tree out front still has my name on the deed, the way Frank intended, the way he worked for 30 years to make sure would always be true. I think about trust differently now, not with less of it. I don't want to become a woman who holds herself at arm's length from the people who love her, out of fear of the people who don't, but with more attention. Trust, I have learned, is not the same as certainty. It is a thing you give and also a thing you verify. Frank knew that. He was a careful man. He trusted people completely, and he watched them clearly, and he knew the difference between the two. I am learning to know the difference too. Last week, I went out to the backyard in the early morning with my coffee, the way I do when the weather is good, and I sat in the patio chair that Frank bought the summer before he got sick, and I looked at the oak tree, and the cardinal was there again, sitting at the very top, the way it does sometimes, singing like it owns the whole street. I said good morning to it. I don't know if that's strange. I don't particularly care if it is. What I care about is what I have, this house, my son, the mornings, the book club, the oak tree, the cardinal, what Frank left me. What I almost lost and didn't, because on a Tuesday night in October, 2 years after I buried my husband, he sat down at our kitchen table in his blue flannel shirt and told me exactly what I needed to know. I believed him. That turned out to be enough.